Hey, Mike. I was wondering in Matthew 21,
Yeah,
it says that the kingdom of God is going to be taken from the Jews and given to a nation bearing the fruits thereof.
it doesn't say that
When did
though.
that happen?
Yeah, it doesn't say that. It's not what it says.
What's it say?
Yeah, so who's the parable spoken against? All right, it's about the religious leadership.
The Pharisees. The
Here are the
Pharisees.
Pharisees and the leaders. Okay, so here's what it says Matthew 21:43. Therefore, I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruit, and the one that falls on the stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush him. Verse 45. When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking about them. And although they
Sure.
were seeking to arrest him, they feared the crowds, right? Who are the crowds? The Jewish crowds, because they, the crowds, held him to be a prophet. So that transition happened. It was taken from them and given to the apostles and the other believers. So the leadership was taken from the corrupt leaders and given to the apostles, who are all Jewish, and the leaders of the early church, who are all Jewish. And the Jewish crowds, they held Jesus to be a prophet. So it wasn't taken from the Jewish people and given to someone else. It was taken from the bad leadership and given to other Jewish leaders. And then from there, the spiritual leadership is Jew and Gentile through the centuries. But it wasn't taken from the Jews. Never taken from the Jews. It was taken from the corrupt leaders. It tells us explicitly the chief priests and Pharisees heard his parables. They perceived he was speaking about them, but they feared the crowds, the Jewish crowds, because the Jewish crowds thought that Yeshua was a prophet.
Well, why is the church constantly described as the Israel of God, the New Jerusalem? I mean, every
It's not.
description
It's
for Old
never, never,
Covenant
never
Israel
once.
is given
Never,
to the church.
Mike, never once. Never once. See,
Galatians 6.
so when you say constantly, Galatians 6:16, one verse, and it doesn't refer to the church as the Israel of God. As the vast majority of translations recognize, it uses the word kai,
Well,
which is
Jew
and in
Gentile.
Greek. No, 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 it's not what it says. But Mike, here, I refuted your statement about Matthew 21. Now, Galatians 6:16, peace be to all who follow this rule, speaking to the Gentiles in Galatia, and separate entity to the Israel of God. Okay? It's two separate entities. Now, as many as live by this rule, shalom and mercy on them, and on the Israel of God, which is Jewish believers in Jesus, like me, like Paul. That's the Israel of God. Paul does not call the church the Israel of God, as the vast majority of translations recognize. So there's neither Jew nor Gentile in Jesus, but I imagine, sir, when you go to the bathroom, you go to the men's room, not the ladies' room. It says there's neither male nor female, but male female distinction still exists, just like Jew Gentile distinction still exists. But in Jesus, we're one. There's no caste system, there's no class system. We're equally children of God, equally branches of the vine, equally priests to God, equally loved by God, in equal relationship with God. But Jew and Gentile
Okay.
distinctions resist. That's why Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 17 and following, that if you're called circumcised, don't become uncircumcised. If you're called uncircumcised, don't become circumcised. So side by side in the body, we have Jewish believers and Gentile believers, one in the Messiah, but not with identical calling in every respect, and not necessarily living the exact same way. There's unity in our diversity. So the church is not the new Israel. It's not a biblical teaching. The church is saved Jews and saved Gentiles. We make up the eternal people of God, saved Jews and saved Gentiles. We are the ecclesia. But the church is not the new Israel, nor has the church replaced Israel. Paul writes in Romans 11:28 and 29 that even though Jewish people now are enemies of the gospel for your sake, they're still loved by God because of the patriarchs, but the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. And that's why God will keep his word to Israel, as Romans 11:26 says in Jeremiah 31:1 and other verses, and there'll be a national turning of the Jewish people to Jesus at the end of the age. So vast harvest of the nations and mass turning of the Jewish people, making up the glorious ecclesia, the glorious church, Jew and Gentile, together in Jesus. So, brother, we are one. There is nothing that separates us. I'm not better than you. You're not better than me. But I'm not a Gentile. You're not a Jew. Just like my wife's not a man and I'm not a woman. There's still distinctions within the body.